Hey guys, Nick Espinoza, your chief security fanatic here, and today we have to talk about something that I didn't think I'd have to talk about in 2020, that I've talked about in the past, but it continues to go on, and that is forced, coerced, and slave labor, because that shiny new iPhone, or even some Android models, or laptops and other things, are actually being made with this. And it gets a whole lot worse, and this is coming out of China. Now, before we actually talk about coerced and forced labor, we need to set the background here for specifically what's going on. And a lot of this is coming from the Associated Press, but I'm picking up reports of this, everywhere. Now, for the background, we are going to be talking about a group called the Uyghurs. Now, this is a Turkic minority that originates in Central and East Asia, and they are recognized as native to the Xinjiang region in China, and they are considered one of China's 55 officially recognized ethnic minorities. But there's a distinction here in that the Uyghurs are recognized by the Chinese government only as a regional minority within China. The government actually rejects the fact that they are an indigenous group. And by virtue of this, and since about 2014, the Uyghurs in the Xinjiang region have been affected by extensive controls and restrictions upon their religion, cultural life, social life, all of this. The Chinese government has expanded police surveillance to watch for signs of quote-unquote religious extremism that include owning books about Uyghurs, growing a beard, having a prayer rug, or quitting smoking or drinking. These are signs that the part of the Uyghur population has converted to Islam. The government has also actually installed cameras in the homes of private citizens. We've talked about China being an authoritarian state. This is exactly what they're doing. Further, at least 120,000, though most estimates put it at over 1 million Uyghurs, have been detained in mass detention camps that have been termed Reeducation Camps. And basically, this is the goal of the Chinese government, is to change the political thinking of the detainees, their identities, their religious beliefs, et cetera, et cetera. That is a quintessential, re-education camp, coming out of a communist regime. And this is where we begin. Now, according to the AP, that broke this stories, when the detainees graduate from these camps, documents show many are sent to work in factories. A dozen Uyghurs and Kazakhs, which is another group originating out of Kazakhstan, but many are sitting in the country of China, told the Associated Press that they knew people who were basically sent by the state to work in factories in China's east, also known as Inner China, and some of these are from these camps, and basically, or they're taken from their families. Most are sent there by force, and in few cases, it was not clear if there was any kind of consent that was involved. Now, one of the factories in question here is one called O-Film. That's O-F-I-L-M, and Here is the information from the Associated Press. Now, Uyghurs are paid the same as other workers, but otherwise they are treated differently. Now, this is according to residents that were interviewed by Associated Press affiliates. They are not allowed to leave or pray like other Muslim immigrants in the area, specifically the Hui Muslim immigrants that also work in this factory, but they are considered less of a threat by the Chinese government. And so they are strictly locked down. And so to quote the AP, and I quote, "If you're a Uyghur, you're not allowed outside. You're only allowed outside twice a month." This is according to a small business owner who spoke with the workers confirmed. The AP is not disclosing the names of those interviewed near the factory out of concern for possible retribution. To quote this individual again, "The government chose them to come to O-Film. They didn't choose it." Now, O-Film's website indicates that basically these workers, these Uyghurs in these factories, make screens, camera cover lenses, and fingerprint scanners. And its customers on its website are Apple, Samsung, Lenovo, Dell, HP, LG, and Huawei. Although there's obviously no way for the AP or any other reporting organization to track specific products at the specific manufacturing facilities and what those products are being shipped from O-Film to Apple, etc. Now, Apple's most recent list of suppliers, though, published in January of last year, includes 3 O-Film factories in Nanchang, and so here we are. Another O-film factory is located about half a mile away on a different street. These are, again, according to addresses confirmed by Apple in their own corporate listing. Now, the Chinese government says that this labor program is basically a way to train the Uyghurs and other minorities and give them jobs. The Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs on Monday called concern over possible coerced or forced labor under this program, quote unquote, groundless and slander. Now, experts are saying, though, like these internment camps, this program is part of a broader assault on the Uyghur culture, breaking up social and family links by sending people far from their homes to be assimilated into the dominant Han Chinese culture. Now, here's my thoughts on this, because this obviously is a huge issue. There's a lot of implications at play here, just outside the tech world, both politically, culturally, all that kind of stuff. But here we are. I mean, the cultures and societies around the world have a differing mindset when it comes to government control, authoritarian versus, let's say, democratic republic, that we have here, United States, et cetera, not to mention education in the state, how you are, raising people to believe, why your country is great, et cetera. But what has basically been universally condemned around the world is slavery. And yet we have roughly 30 million people that are classified as slaves in various countries around the world. Many of these slaves, quote unquote, are owned, quote unquote, by the state themselves. North Korea being the perfect example, with over 1 million people that are considered enslaved in that country. So this is a huge problem here. Now, this problem is multifaceted. So consider the following issues that we have to address in order to address slavery. Here's how this just basically rolls out. China, hands down, is the largest manufacturer on the planet, which basically means much of the world depends on its production, to supply the world. Now, by virtue of this, China must ensure that it is continuously expanding its production base. China's communist government is authoritarian with a history of re-education and forced labor since its inception, by Mao Zedong when he defeated Chiang Kai-shek, and this practice has basically been normal for them, since the founding of their state. Although I have to say, as somebody that spent a good chunk of time in China, not recently though, obviously coronavirus, etc., the last thing I would call them is a purely communist state. I have never seen more wealth in my life being flashed around than I did when I'm sitting in Beijing. So just take that for what it's worth. But their government claims communist as a communist state. So by virtue of that, the world hasn't formally condemned China for the roughly 3.4 million quote-unquote slaves of forced labor that they currently have making the world's iPhones, Samsungs, Androids, all this kind of stuff. Now, the question is, why is that? And I think because China is also accumulating wealth quickly, and it has the largest population on the planet that is online, roughly 850 million mobile users on the internet, which is a massive presence, which means China themselves, are a massive market for things like the iPhone and other technologies. So Apple, Google, Samsung know this. They turn a blind eye to this basically in their supply chain as it keeps their production costs down and maximizes profitability. The only time we ever see this addressed is when these things come to light. For example, when Foxconn had a whole rash of employee suicides, Apple then started really addressing this, even though it had been going on for years. It only when it sees the light of day is this really come out. Now, the respective governments of Apple, Google, and Samsung, in this case, the United States of America, and in Samsung's case, the country of South Korea, have publicly condemned these practices, but have not ordered the Apples or the Samsungs of the world to actually stop using Chinese manufacturers that do this, that practice this kind of coerced, forced, or slave labor. And so, if you hate this as much as I do, what can you do? That's the real question here. How can we make a positive impact on this situation? And I'll be honest with you here, brutally honest with you here, writing your government officials is absolutely pointless. China is not going to listen to them anyway, and there is so much at stake for the government to be proactive. And so, for example, think about this. the United States alone is collecting billions of dollars in tax revenue every time Apple or Samsung or HP or Dell or whoever it is releases a new phone, a computer, etc. And so this is a massive money-making revenue stream for the governments. United States, South Korea, take your pick. Now, the only place here to hurt them financially, and that's what we're talking about here. That's the only way that we're going to be able to help is if we hit them financially and make it difficult. But boycotts don't work against companies that are $1 trillion in size. You can never get enough people onto a boycott to really make a dent, and I guarantee you, if you were able to get you and your friends to, let's say, boycott Apple products, they would sell 10 times more phones in a day than you would get people to sign up for this thing for a year. And so that is an absolutely pointless thing. It won't even dent their stock market price. So the best thing you can do is actually, quite frankly, hold on to your phone and your laptop longer. Phones will actually last a few years. The hardware on higher end phones, like your Apple phones or your Samsung Galaxies, typically have way more power than the actual operating system and the apps that you are downloading, which means you can extend the life of these things for a much longer time. I personally have an iPad that I've had for probably 5 to 7 years. I've never had to replace it, and I'm an Android person to begin with, but I have the Apple, the iPad for testing purposes, works just fine. And now that Apple and Samsung, etc., have been caught actually throttling their phones and are no longer supposed to do that, you will see your older phones last longer even as you're updating to newer operating systems, because typically in the development world for technology, hardware fast outpaces software. We're always playing catch up. So if I buy a new computer today, you expect it to last 3 to 5 years unless you are doing something absolutely bleeding edge, with that computer. And so if you're holding on to it a little longer, that basically is going to force them to produce less. That is going to lower this. And if they start to understand, well, wait a second, if this is tied to, let's say, the outrage publicly, in the media to, let's say, coerced, forced, or slave labor that is manufacturing this, then they start to get on board saying this affects the bottom line. The governments get on board because it affects their tax revenue. And quite frankly, if you're a huge environmentalist or something, if you are getting or buying less phones, then you are lowering the production of these things, which probably helps the environment in some way, shape, or form. I really have not thought that one out, but I'm just thinking of that off the top of my head. For example, and it's not my current phone, I have the latest Samsung Note, but I have an old Note 5. I don't turn in my phones for security purposes and all of that. And on occasion, I will fire it up and it works just fine. I updated it, I want to say like a week or two ago, to the latest Android operating system, and I see zero problems with it whatsoever. And so that's about it. That's all you really need to do, I think, to help this situation out here, and it will go a very long way. But I can't believe in 2020 we actually still have to talk about this. And if you are looking at some of the most egregious countries that have, forced, coerced, or slave labor, China's up there at 3.4 million, North Korea's up there at 1, and there are other countries that are higher or lower on that list. But that is a very serious problem I think we need to talk about. And quite frankly, I don't necessarily want to know that, my phone, my Samsung here, was made by slave labor, but I'd rather know it and I'd rather address it in whatever way I can, than doing nothing. And so here I am making a video trying to make more people aware. So that is your news for this Friday. Hopefully it's not going to bum you out, for the weekend, but here we are. And please like, share, follow me here on Facebook and Twitter at NickAESP. And please feel free to subscribe to me at YouTube as well. And as always, stay safe and stay online. Thanks, guys.